everybody. My name is Covyn Montemayor. I'm an acupuncture physician here in the state of Florida. Within my practice, I get to do, of course, acupuncture. I also specialize in herbal medicine, dietary counseling, lifestyle coaching, and cupping therapy. I'm so excited to be doing this Facebook Live with Living Vicky because I'm very passionate about working with women and helping them work on the health conditions that they have that is impeding their ability to succeed in life. Really, I love partnering with women to help them pursue their passions successfully and emphatically. So today's topic really aligns right with my passion, which is super awesome, and I'm so excited to be chatting with you guys a little bit about that. Today we're talking about tips for productivity. But before we can talk about productivity, we have to have a little bit of a baseline of what sabotages productivity so often. And so I wanted to highlight a few things on the physical and the mental and emotional side of health and well-being that often impede people's ability to be productive. Now, whether that productivity is in the workplace, which is probably what we'll focus on a lot of, but productivity, of course, also shows up in our motivation to achieve the personal goals we set, to achieve the relational goals that we set, and just to show up everywhere in life in the ways that we want to, and really embody ourselves in the most powerful way that we can. So let's get into those productivity saboteurs. The first one I wanted to start off with is fatigue. And the fatigue is something I see clinically a lot. There can be several underlying causes for fatigue. Fatigue is just an all-encompassing kind of tiredness. This could be mental or emotional fatigue, it could be physical fatigue, or it could just be even you can't keep your eyes open, or you're just not mentally there all the time. So there are a few roots to fatigue. One would be sleep disorders, so if you're not getting the proper amount of rest, and we'll get more into that in a minute, but that can be one of the underlying causes for tiredness throughout the day at miscellaneous times. Another common cause is an endocrine imbalance. The thyroid function is highly involved in our ability to feel energized and motivated in order to do what we want to do throughout the day. And then lastly, it can be due to chronic stress. And this kind of involves the mental and emotional side of fatigue in congruence with the physical side of fatigue. And so oftentimes when there's some kind of underlying chronic stressor in our hearts or in our minds, it's going to start bleeding over into our physical capacity to do what we need to do. And so oftentimes one of the first ways that somatized stress, which is just stress that happens in our mind and then transfers to the body, transfers into the body, is through our energy levels. It's one of the first little red flags that we should really be aware about, telling us that we need to take a step back and figure out what's going on and how we can take care of ourselves so that we can re-engage in a productive way. So that's fatigue is our starter with the sabotage for our productivity. The next one I wanted to touch on is sleep, and I kind of talked about it a second ago, but sleep is so important for our lives. Sleep is such a phenomenal medicine. Oftentimes, clinically, when I'm working with people, if I notice that they are not sleeping, or if sleep is just kind of one of their side comments, oh yeah, I don't sleep that great, but it's not a big deal, it actually is almost always the primary cause of what they're coming in for. Sleep is so important for us. It's not only about getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep. If you're not getting 8 to 9 hours, that's a good place to start. Let's work towards 8 to 9 hours of sleep. But it's not just about getting 8 to 9 hours, it's really getting 8 to 9 rested hours, which means you're waking up in the morning feeling ready to go. You do not need to reach for a cup of coffee or a matcha latte or some kind of caffeine to get you going. You're just awake and you're ready and engaged for life. This is the wonder that sleep brings us. So one of the red flags to know if your sleep is maybe not as good as it could be, and even maybe impacting your professional productivity, is if it's difficult to fall asleep. That's one of the sleep red flags that's saying that there might be something going on. If you are waking up throughout the night, if you're waking up more than twice this is considered abnormal. If you're waking up once to use the restroom or something like that and you're able to go right back to sleep, not a really big deal. And then the last one is if you're having a lot of dreams at night and you're not waking up feeling rested. Those are all kinds of ways that sleep can be notifying your mind that there might be something going on with your ability for your sympathetic nervous system to calm down. And at night, that's what's supposed to be happening. Our sympathetic is supposed to be resting, and our body is supposed to be rejuvenated and refreshed for the next day so that we can attack what we want to and pursue what we want to. Okay, before I go into our next one, I want to mention one more thing about sleep, and that is studies have shown that people who chronically have reduction in sleep, so maybe 4 to 5 hours of unrested sleep, are just as dangerous driving as someone who's driving under the influence. So what they're noticing is with a reduction in rest, or like I was just saying a second ago, that reduction in sympathetic's opportunity to rest, we're seeing a disruption in somebody's ability to discern and problem solve quickly, similarly to how people are under the influence of alcohol. And so even just from that standpoint alone, you can see why sleep is so important for our ability to be productive. Some of the most important things with productivity is the ability to see clearly and the ability to move quickly. And so if those two things are impeded because our body is tired or our mind is tired, then this is going to heavily impact our ability to get things done. Okay, another physical thing I wanted to touch on this subject is muscle tension and pain. I'm sure if we did a quick survey, everyone would be able to agree with me that if you're having some kind of pain, shoulder pain, neck pain, a headache, it's just going to be annoying. It's going to impede your ability to really focus in on what you want to focus in on and do what you want to do. Even if you're not doing something with, if your shoulder's in pain, and even if you're not using your shoulder, it's still kind of annoying. It's just kind of minorly there. Or you could have more severe pain, then it's even more of an impedance to your ability to do what you need to do. But muscle pain, muscle tightness is one of those things that I see clinically a lot that has an effect on people's ability to do what they want to do and also do what they need to do. Okay. And then my last one here was on mental and emotional fatigue. So I talked about this when we first started talking about the fatigue, but I wanted to kind of expand the mental and emotional side out a little bit because there's not many of us who would maybe be aware or maybe acknowledge that we are mentally or emotionally fatigued. So I wanted to kind of expand it a little bit more. So being mentally or emotionally fatigued, you might feel like you're easily overwhelmed. Just the smallest little change of plans or something didn't work out exactly how you needed it to, and it just seems like a complete meltdown or just feels like this overwhelming rush in your mind and in your body. This is one of the signs of mental and emotional fatigue. One of the others would be feeling like you're running on empty or running on fumes. That's a big sign. Being reactive instead of responsive, so being emotionally reactive, whatever that reaction is, whether it's spewing anger or whether it's just being really sad and bursting out into tears over something that's maybe not a normal trigger for you. And then the last one would be just this kind of underlying easiness to be frustrated or irritable. These are all kind of signs that are pointing towards an imbalance or dysregulation in the mind and in the heart. And so when we're talking about productivity, so much of our ability to focus and also the willpower to actually get things done, which both of those things are involved in productivity, we need our mind to be in the right place. If you're pursuing your passion, which I hope everybody is because you do your best work when you're doing what you were designed to do, but when you're pursuing your passion, if there's something that's overwhelming you about the process, it's simply a red flag telling you need to pivot a little bit. Whether that pivot is in what you're pursuing or whether that pivot is how you're pursuing it or even how you're taking care of yourself as you're moving forward towards that pursuit. And so now I kind of want to get into a little bit more of the how do we actually take care of ourselves better? How do we, what are some of the things that we can do to navigate these sabotaging factors that are in so many of our lives that are so common? So let's get into the tips. So the first one, I'm going to talk about sleep. Since we started with sleep, I want to talk about some tips to help regulate sleep. Even if you don't have maybe a major problem with sleep, maybe you have a minor problem with sleep, there's still ways that you can probably improve the way you're sleeping so that you can wake up feeling fully rested, fully engaged, and ready to go throughout the day. My roommates often tease me because in the mornings I am so excited. It's my favorite part of the day. I wake up ready to go and smiling, usually having some dance parties in the kitchen. And really, that shows that the body is ready to go into what it needs to do. The mind is ready to engage in the world. And that's really a positive thing. And that happens because of good sleep. So, some sleep tips. Sleep hygiene is so important. Oftentimes, as adults, we don't think much about sleep because we're adults. When we think of a sleep schedule or a bedtime, we think of childhood or adolescence. And yet, as an adult, you should have a bedtime. Have a time when you know this is approximately when you go to sleep every night. This will get your body into a good rhythm. Our bodies work off rhythms, especially the female body. We work off rhythms and we work off cycles. So if we're not helping our body work with the cycle, we're kind of stunting our ability to function on a neurotransmitter level, on a hormone level, and even just on an emotional and physical rest level. So setting your body up to win by having a strict sleep schedule, or maybe not strict, but a sleep schedule is really important. So having an intentional bedtime, making sure that you don't have to be up before 8 to 9 hours of rest is a good plan. Making sure that the blue light, so no technology, a certain amount of time before bed is really helpful. Now, this can be hard because a lot of us fall asleep with technology in our hands, or we fall asleep in front of the TV, or we're trying to do a little bit more work, so we're doing some emails or doing something like that on the computer. So having the structure in your life that you know, hey, at 9 p.m. my technology is off because I'm going to be in bed at 10 or 10:30. This is a good plan for yourself. This gives you some structure so you don't have to think every night about what's going on, what am I doing. You kind of have the general looseness of a schedule for your evening. If, for example, you have some difficulty falling asleep, you can look into chamomile tea to help just calm the brain a little bit. In order for you to help initiate sleep, you could try lavender. Essential oil or tea is fine to help kind of soothe you into sleep. Changing the lighting, not only the blue lighting, but also just the lighting in the house can be very helpful. After a certain time, you can start to turn down the lights ever so slightly until finally you're ready to go to bed. So these are some just general things that you can use for a sleep schedule. Okay, now I want to talk about fatigue. Now, of course, for fatigue, if you're having a dip in energy, or if it's more severe and really leaning into some kind of fatigue syndrome, we start off with sleep, but we just talked about that, so we won't go back into that. The other things you can do would be not to overutilize caffeine. I know when you're a little groggy, you think caffeine will fix this. I know because I've been there and I've been in that space of, oh, coffee will fix this. Coffee will fix my attitude. Coffee will fix my energy, and then I'll be able to really do what I need to do. And while once in a while leaning on caffeine or leaning on something sweeter is okay to help increase your energy so you can do what you need to do, this is not something that we should kind of indulge in consistently. And that's because it undermines your adrenals, and it kind of creates this overproduction of cortisol in the body, which can, over a long period of time, lead to a lot of different health conditions, including anxiety, including weight gain, including severe forms of fatigue, and other endocrine dysregulation and imbalance. So I'm a big fan of preventative medicine, and some of the best preventative medicine is to make sure your lifestyle is not promoting an unhealthy imbalance in your body. So one of the ways you can do that is to consume caffeine mindfully. I think it's fine if you consume caffeine on a regular basis. I do coffee or teas on a regular basis, and all of those have caffeine. But you can kind of be intentional about it. If you notice that your body's becoming more dependent on the caffeine to function, that's a red flag that maybe you're having too much caffeine and maybe your body needs more rest than you're giving it. So one other note I want to mention on caffeine. The benefit of caffeine, why caffeine actually helps us, is it increases our cortisol levels in the body just a little bit. And this brightens our mind, it helps us focus, it helps us be re-engaged, it gives us energy, which is why we love caffeine so much. So you do not want to drink caffeine when your cortisol levels are already high, because it's only increasing them further. So it's best to consume caffeine during certain times of the day when your cortisol levels are starting to dip. So between 9 and 11 a.m., our cortisol levels start to dip. And in the afternoon, between 2 to 5 p.m. approximately, our cortisol levels start to dip again. So these would be times that you should consume caffeine. Outside of that, you're working against your body's natural rhythm if you're consuming caffeine. So that's just a little bit of food therapy advice there. Okay, so we talked about caffeine, we talked about the adrenals, emotional and mental stress. Let's park here for a second. When we're in the productive zone mentally, we just want to do, we need to get things done, we've got a list of things that we need to work through. It can be so easy to put the emotional side of our life on the back burner. And, oh, I'll deal with that later, I'll think about it later, I don't have time for that today, I don't have time for this emotion today. And while there are times when we need to refocus and pivot our energies elsewhere, we shouldn't ignore mental and emotional flags. Usually in our body and our mind are phenomenal and beautiful. Usually in the mind and the body, there's going to be very minor red flags or signals saying, hey, I need a little bit more attention. Hey, I need you to do this. Hey, I need more rest. And as we ignore these kind of minor red flags, they become more blaring. Just as if, imagine you were driving your car, you see the check engine light on, and you're going, I don't think it's a big deal. I don't have time for that today. I'll worry about it later. Depending on what the problem is, it's going to be severe. Your car might not even be able to function by the end of, by a few miles. So in the same way, these kinds of signals in your body, these are the check engine lights. And so if you ignore the minor little signs of things, it's going to become more obvious and more profound in your lifestyle and in your ability to get the things done that you need to do. And so checking in with the mind, checking in with the heart. How are you doing emotionally? How are you doing mentally? Really creating time in your schedule, and it's not just time, but also creating the practice of it, because it's so easy to just ignore and move forward and just move on, and those things just continue to bottle up, and eventually you'll get to that space where we were talking about earlier, of mental and emotional fatigue and being easily irritable or feeling consistently overwhelmed. Back to what I was saying earlier about passion. When you're pursuing your passion, if you're not really paying attention to those red flags, the danger is you might become numb to the things that made you passionate once. And that's one of the most heartbreaking things for me to see in the clinical setting, because it impacts the person's life so much. And yet, like I said earlier, I think it's so important that we all pursue the passion that we were made to pursue. And so being mindful, checking in, taking care of yourself mentally, emotionally, and physically is so important in your ability to actually move forward and do the things that you were designed to do. Okay, so I've talked about a few lifestyle recommendations already about how you can kind of increase your productivity. We talked about sleep. One of the things I haven't touched on is exercise which is so important for us. Any form of exercise is so important, whether you enjoy HIIT exercises, or if you enjoy walking, or if you enjoy yoga or Pilates. Regardless of the type of exercise, it's more important that you're intentionally moving your body and that you're intentionally making time for that practice. This is a way that you can actively take care of yourself so that when you're at work, you can really be present in the ways that you need to be present at work. Making time for yourself within every day is so important. And this will really give you the opportunity to practice presence in a meaningful way. One of the productivity saboteurs that I see affect a lot of people, and even I'm guilty of this productivity saboteur as well, is just a lack of presence, thinking about what I need to do, or I forgot to do this, or I need to text that person back, I need to check in with that person, I wanted to do this. And you're having all these thoughts when you're supposed to be focused on potentially a meeting or potentially something else. And so really practicing presence will help you and will give you the opportunity to, in those meetings or in those whatever you need to do, you'll actually be able to get it done versus kind of on the back burner be thinking about everything else that has to go on. And so having an intentional time within the day, whether it's the morning or whether it's the night before, where you know what you need to accomplish the next day and you kind of have it on your mind already so that you can go forward. Now, a quick note here on sleep practices. Some people find it helpful to have that written list of what you need to do the next day and go over it the night before. If you're like me, you will not sleep well if you have a list of things about tomorrow that you need to do. So I like to start my day going through, hey, this is everything that needs to be done, and this is the time that I'll have to rest and relax. This is my, all these things that I have already planned to kind of compensate for the workload. Which helps me sleep better at night. So whether you're a morning person or you can do it at night is okay, but making sure that you have that practice is going to be very helpful. Okay, awesome. Let's go ahead and look at some questions. Castine has a great question here. What role does time management play in a balanced work-life scenario? I think this plays a major role because, like I was just saying a second ago about presence and knowing what you need to do in the morning or the night before, it really gives you the opportunity to get it done in a meaningful or impactful way. If you are kind of constantly in work mode, and I know it's so easy to be there, this can lead to burnout. Burnout is another way of saying that mental and emotional and even physical fatigue syndromes. When we're burnt out, we can't pursue what we need to pursue. And so having some structure around what work looks like for you and what life looks like for you is really important. It's so easy for us to just batch life together as one encompassing portion of life, so it's work and life. But really, there's so much beyond life than just this secondary bubble. There's relational life, there's personal life, there's community life, and there's spiritual or religious life. And these are all aspects of life that we should be engaged in and participating in outside of work. And so work is really just one of those spheres that we engage in. And so, yeah, we should have balance between work and all those other things that I've just said. If we don't have that kind of balance, it leads to potentially an unhealthy or a dangerous kind of flow in our lives, and we're not really respecting the rhythms that and the blessings that community and relationships and also solitude offer our ability to be present in life in. Okay, Jamie has another question. If communication is 75% body language and we're stressed, what are our bodies saying to others? So this, if you're an observer like me, I love to watch people, love to people watch. You might notice some of these stress things that I'm going to mention. So for one, oftentimes when we're pensive or overthinking, it's so easy to kind of, push our eyebrows together and just kind of focus. Now, if you're vain like me, you don't want these lines on your face. So this automatically communicates something. Now, that's not communicating anything physically to you, but it's communicating to others that you are actively thinking about other things. Another way that it impacts body language and therefore communicates to the world what's going on, you might have those really tight shoulders. Stress often gives us tight shoulders. I work with a lot of women who are chronically stressed, who've got severe shoulder and neck pain. So you'll see kind of the shoulders and the arms leaning up, or you'll just see them kind of holding their body in such a way that it's uncomfortable. And so, if maybe you hold stress in your body in the shoulders, doing stretching and exercises as well as breathing exercises where your shoulders are pulled back and they're balanced and you're trying to just loosen the muscles and you're intentionally breathing, this can be very helpful in reteaching your body how to hold itself. Oftentimes, if we are chronically in this stressed mode, our brain and our body is so used to holding itself a certain way that we actually have to retrain our body how to hold itself. So for people with this chronic neck or shoulder problem that I've just mentioned, they actually have to intentionally pull their shoulders down, because even if they're not stressed in the moment or they're not thinking about it, their shoulders are kind of slowly going to be pulling up, and they're going to start feeling that tension at the neck or the base of the head that gives them those annoying headaches. And so being very intentional about pulling the shoulders back, taking a few deep breaths, and kind of composing yourself and engaging in a healthy way will help you move forward, and it'll also help you engage with others in a way that doesn't make you come across as if you're frustrated or you're overwhelmed or something like this. Okay, looks like there's a few more questions. So, do you recommend any specific diets or supplements to help keep your body healthy and focused? So, with diets, we all have a diet, whether we're intentional about our diet or whether we're unintentional about our diet. We all have one. Why? Because we all eat. So, with food, I'm a really strong component of cleaning the diet up a little bit, but also living in moderation and freedom. And so, I would practice certain dietary standards, but don't be afraid to explore cultures. So much of cultures are in food. And so I'd hate to say, you can't eat dairy, and then you go somewhere where there's this great tres leches, and then you can't have it. I'm not about that life. I think experiencing life as it comes, including the sweets and the fried foods at times in moderation and maybe in small amounts, is absolutely okay. So some general food guidelines would be eating 3 times a day at least, or making sure that your appetite is at the place it should be. Oftentimes we think, our appetite, if it's kind of weak, it's actually good because I'm not eating as much. This is actually not good. Having a healthy appetite is a good sign that your digestive system is functioning properly. But I digress. Back to food. So eating 3 times a day, preferably, and at consistent times is going to help regulate blood sugar and all these things. Reducing simple carbohydrates and processed foods is very good for your body, and increasing complex carbs, very good. Simple carbs, we crave them and we like them and we eat them a lot because they quickly give our body energy. Simple carbs transfer to sugar very quickly, so our body gets that boost of energy, which is often why we crave those kinds of things like chips, or processed sugary foods, snack bars, things like that. So stepping away from those types of simple carbs and moving more into complex carb foods, or whole food snack bars or things like that are going to be better, because it's going to generally sustain your energy instead of having a spike and then a dip. So those would be helpful for you. Vegetables, we can't get around vegetables. Vegetables are so good for our body. They give our body the building blocks that it requires to do everything that our body does. And like I said earlier, the body is powerful and the body is beautiful, and it needs a lot of energy and a lot of supplies in order to do what it needs to do. So making sure that you are dietarily equipped or nutritionally equipped is a big part in being healthy overall. So mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and of course physically. Regulating meat is really important. So what I mean by that is oftentimes we eat meat. Some people eat meat 3 times a day. If they're having 3 meals, they have meat with every meal. This doesn't necessarily work for every body. All of our bodies are different. Some of our bodies don't need as much meat. Now, I'm not saying go vegetarian if you're a meat eater or go vegan, but oftentimes people will notice regulation in their health when they start to reduce meat slightly. Now I'm assuming we're working with the standard American diet, which is very meat heavy. Now, if vegetarian or veganism is a dietary choice, then making sure you have proteins is really important, but you can get proteins from plants, which is really great. So I'm broadly answering your question, Castine. I don't have a particular diet to promote. I think every body is a little bit different, and what works for one body is different for another. So these are just kind of general kind of guidelines. So reducing those processed foods, transferring from simple carbs to more complex carbs, regulating meat in the diet, and then reducing sugars. We get so many processed sugars in our day-to-day. It's absolutely ridiculous. Our body does not need that much sugar. While sweet is such a healthy flavor for our body and for balance in our body, we as Americans often overindulge in this sweet flavor. And so reducing and being mindful of the sugar that you're using is very important. You can transition to honey. Honey's a great one. Cane sugar is a little bit better than other forms of processed sugar. Molasses, I just tried the other day, has a unique flavor, but it does add some sweetness to things. So just kind of playing around with alternatives other than, processed white sugar is really good. And then, of course, starting to be aware and starting to look at all the foods that you eat frequently that might have a lot of sugar in them can be really helpful. And then my last one here would be being mindful of dairy. So, like I said earlier, I think everything in moderation is okay. But it's so easy for us to eat a lot of dairy in this standard American diet. We drink milk or creamer with our coffee. We have cheese with several parts of our meal. Sour cream is in so many different things. Our diets are very dairy heavy in the United States. And oftentimes dairy can cause problems in the digestive system, cause sluggishness in the digestive system. And so if you are someone who would eat dairy a lot, I would consider reducing dairy slightly in your diet and seeing how that works for you. So those would be some of the general kinds of dietary recommendations that I would give. Of course, drinking the appropriate amount of water is so good for our body. So when I say the appropriate amount of water, generally for the standard person, half of your body's weight in fluid ounces is how much water you should be drinking. That being said, when you consume caffeine or coffee, you need to increase your water intake on top of that half of your body's weight in ounces bit. This is because coffee is a natural diuretic, so you'll be losing the fluids that you're intaking, and so you need to replenish those fluids. But making sure you're properly hydrated is really important. You can also get that water content by eating raw vegetables and certain fruits. Watermelons, rich in hydration. Aloe juice, very rich for the body in hydration and in electrolytes. Coconut water's very helpful. There's one other one I was going to say. Cucumbers, super helpful for dehydration kinds of things. So increasing water is also good. let's get to Sheila's question. So for those on a tight budget or time budget, so money or time budget, which services would you prioritize? This is a good question. Acupuncture, massage, counseling, or something else? So this is a good question for sure. And a lot of it is dependent on what we're working with. You know, if someone has a severe pain syndrome, then we need to get them out of pain as quickly as possible, because pain stops so much of our ability to engage in life that we want to. And so if someone has some kind of severe syndrome with pain, then we need to get them off of that. So for pain, I recommend acupuncture and massage. Now, if someone's coming in for a mental and emotional type of syndrome, working on the physical manifestations can be helpful, but addressing the underlying mental and emotional disruption is ultimately what's going to have the sustainable long-term effect. And so for that, I recommend counseling. Counseling can be such a helpful aspect of our lives. Oftentimes, we are living out certain patterns from the way that we observed life as a child growing up, and we're living them out in our professional environments, in our adult relationships. And so if you're noticing that things aren't quite going in the ways in which you feel like they should be going, it can be helpful to talk to someone and see if maybe there was something in the past that's kind of coming up and you're reliving as an adult, but on the subconscious scale. So for those types of things, I recommend counseling. I'd say for everyone that I work with, if they were to clean up their diet and regulate their diet ever so slightly, it would significantly impact their health across the board, mentally, emotionally, physically. If we can change our diet and our lifestyle up ever so slightly, you're gonna save the time, you're gonna save the money, and it's going to impact your life across the board. And so for somebody who is maybe financially, you know, there's not money in the budget to be working with an acupuncturist, or there's just, you're looking at your time schedule and you're like, I don't know where I'm gonna fit in a 30-minute acupuncture appointment. And I know I need to work on this, but I don't know how. I would look at lifestyle. Even if we just look at what we eat. If you're eating multiple times a day, you're making a decision multiple times a day that is either helping your body function or hurting your body's function. And so food and lifestyle choices, lifestyle includes exercise, sleep routines. It includes the thoughts that we have, the thoughts that we allow to kind of permeate our mind. These are all things that impact epigenetics, which is a part of our genetic makeup that is turned on and off. So diseases are dependent on these little on and off switches. So this is a beautiful part of modern science that proves that what we eat and what we think and how we live heavily impacts our health. It's not always a genetic problem. Even if your parents had the problem, it doesn't necessarily mean that your body is going to manifest it. Rather, if your body flicks this switch, then it will manifest versus your parents having that switch. So diet and lifestyle would be my primary recommendations for everyone across the board, but especially for people who maybe don't have the time or don't have the finances to devote towards pursuing their health in this way. And so following these tips that I've given you today can be very helpful in just kind of creating a baseline of healthy habits in your life that are not sabotaging your physical health or your professional health, as with productivity. Okay, last question here. Kayla's asking, does improved productivity mean doing more? This is a good question. I also think there's a layer of a philosophical answer here. Generally, I would say no. I think it's always better that we work smarter, not harder. And oftentimes, we're in this, doing more, very action-based kind of society in general. And yet, doing more having more things on your plate is not always what's best. I touched on this earlier, we think of work as half of our life. We think of work and life. Often, you hear this often in culture, work-life balance, work-life flow, and this life section, really, there's so much shoved into this life section. Family is shoved into this life section. Your own self is put into this life section. Your community is put into this life section. If you participate in a religious or spiritual community, that's put into this life section. And so really, I believe all these sections should be separated out. And so we actually view now the entirety versus just in two parts. But when we're thinking about productivity, we have to think through the costs. Anytime that we do something, there's costs to it. There's consequences to it. Positive and sometimes negative consequences, and positive and sometimes negative costs involved. And so when we think of what's impacting this sphere of our life, whether it's relationally or vocationally, or personally for yourself, we have to think through the cost of it. And so when we're thinking of how we can kind of narrow in our productivity and narrow in our focus, we need to really strategize. And this is a very individual thing. You need to strategize about what you need to do and the best way to go about it. So for some people, being more productive might require a little bit more work. They might need to hustle a little bit more. But for other people, they might actually need to take a step back and take care of themselves a little bit differently, a little more intentionally, before they can start pursuing this level of productivity in this sphere or this area of life. And so I think the question is a very individualized question, but one thing that I can say on it is to encourage and hopefully maybe inspire or challenge you to actually take the time and create some goals in each of these different areas of your life. Because ultimately, if all you're focusing on is one of these areas of your life, the others will be deficient. And when those other areas of your life are deficient, you don't have a fully rounded or fully grounded life. And this can lead to a lot of things. And so I often encourage people to think of what they truly want, what they want in each of these spheres of life, and creating those that structure around what you want will give you the right kind of structure around how to pursue it. Suddenly questions about, well, how do I get this thing that I wanted becomes very clear. Oh, this is what I want. This is how I need to pursue it. And so you're not necessarily just throwing activity at the goal and hoping that something sticks. You're actually, no, this is how I'm going to get it. This is how I'm going to pursue it. And, this can be very helpful in kind of balancing positive, productive action versus simply activity and being busy and kind of being stuck in a rat race kind of thing. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the comments. This has been an awesome discussion. I hope you have gotten something out of it. I hope you've learned a little bit about just how to take care of yourself a little bit differently or maybe more intentionally, as well as just some general tips for being more productive in any sphere of life that you're pursuing. And on that note, I will take off here.